cash is actually my favorite subject, all right? And finding it, to me, is what got me excited. One of the reasons I hated being an accountant is I realized that what I needed to worry about never showed up in the financial statements. So, for example, what did he call when you lost the deals? Was pukers. So is there a financial statement line item that you have right now in your P&L that says pukers? No. Is there a financial statement line item that I hired a dumbass? No. All right? See, the thing is, what we really need to worry about, and when I talk about the leaks, it's all leadership mistakes. It's all the things we do, but we're not quantifying. So what I would want to do in a company is I want to know how many deals puked, what the average deal size is. I want to know how much is that's been happening every month, and I want it up on a wall. We actually did this with Ren. We asked them to do that in HR. When we realized how many positions they needed to fill, we're like, all right, so what is the average profit value when that person's ramped up? So, all right, so for every salesperson, it was worth X. All right, so you need 12 of them. 12 times that number was a big-ass number. I said to put that up on the wall, and I want your HR person to look at it and realize that's how much money is burning every day until she gets the job done. And sure enough, faster than ever, they hired 9 salespeople. Right? As soon as you see the number, it's like, holy crap, this is huge. Right? So that's what I want you to capture, and that's where this is fun. So what I want you to realize, so now in the middle of your table, there's 2 tools they shared with you. This one's there. It should have, there's a lot of instructions that go with it. In the end, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an ability to actually download the Excel. I don't even manually calculate this crap. I'd rather make it easy for you. I really want you to just get the ideas. Don't get all caught up in some of the calculations look a little fishy. The Excel spreadsheet will do for you. I'm going to give that to you guys, no problem. Just go in and you grab it. But I do want to give you the concepts because the concepts are important. So one of the things when I kind of step back, and it's what was really bugging me, was, first of all, we make financial statements all too complicated. So if you get done with that last section, you're like, well, maybe this is kind of complicated. But here's the thing. There's only 7 ways that we can actually improve cash in your business and the speed of cash in your business that we need you to focus on. 4 of them are on your P&L, 3 of them are on your balance sheet. So this is going to carry over from the last time, but I want to summarize it for you. So there's 2 ways you can increase revenue. You can either change your volume or you can change your price. So which one is more valuable? Why? So what happens is every time I change $1 of price, I've already incurred the cost. So every dollar falls to my bottom line. Now, if in your business you're paying commissions on that, you have to subtract the commissions. But you're always going to have much more of it go to the bottom line than a new volume. New volume has other costs. It's going to get cut out. So price is more valuable, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. And then the second thing you can do is you can reduce direct costs, which is why I want to know what they are as a percentage of revenue. So I want to start thinking about ways to do that. And then the fourth way is getting that overhead lower as a percentage of revenue. That's all you can do. So you can look at all the financial statement line items you are, but look at the big picture. I don't care how many pencils somebody bought last week. I don't care, how much gas they used last week per se. First of all, I want to know the big nuts. And so those are the big nuts. And then on the balance sheet, you can collect faster, you can pay slower, and then you can turn those properties faster. That's it, right? 7 ways that every business in every quarter you need to do. You're going to use this calculator to actually calculate where your biggest opportunities are, because many times you're chasing the easy stuff, but not the stuff that matters. And then there's, and remember I said I was the master of the obvious? All right, so there's only 3 ways you can improve those 7 things. You can reduce mistakes. You can get rid of the dumbasses and get the right people in the right seats. You can improve your business model. That's more innovation, process change, using technology, that kind of stuff. That's it. So every quarter, look at those 7 things, and then think about the different ways you can move those 7 things. And that's what we're going to essentially do together right now. Everybody still with me? Who's with me? Just want to make sure. I know this is getting close to lunch. I don't want to lose everybody. So that's good. All right. So what I just taught you is, remember that first financial I showed you, 1 plus 1 plus 1 equal 3? Well, now we got 7 ones. So we got 7 different 1% moves. So remember the 1 plus 1 plus 1 got to 42? So now imagine I can just make 1% moves. So this same company that I've been sharing the story with all the way through had $935,000 of actual net cash flow. By making 1% changes, only 1% changes in all 7 areas, we'd have $1,000,001 to their bottom line. So we'd go, basically, $200,000 to $300,000 better just by making 1% moves. So don't always swing for the fences. Now, I don't want to discourage you, being the entrepreneur that I am, to find the big fences and not to be afraid to go after them. Just know what they're worth. So one of the things, this slide deck is going to be shared. I saw some of you get disappointed. You tried to take a picture. I'll go back if you just want that slide just for a second. But all of this is going to be shared, and that's why I didn't worry about numbers being small, any of that kind of stuff. But what I want to make sure is that we start thinking about, if you put a priority down, so you all have priorities, a bunch of you use EOS, all of that, you're like, this is what I want to do this quarter. If you can't put a dollar amount next to it, it's garbage. There needs to be a dollar amount, and every time I've had a client push back and say, well, this one we just have to do, the numbers never, ever materially changed because they did that. And I already knew that was going to happen because they couldn't say this is how it was going to change. This is how the number was going to change. So now you have that right. You're making money. You want to make, pet peeve changes in your business. That's great. But I'd rather you focus your organization on the things that are going to move the needle. And that's what we're going to do here. So the very top part is my favorite part. It's the people. And the reason is this is where the most leadership mistakes are happening. And I want to help you quantify that because I want to get you furious to go out and change your practices a little bit. I want you to look at some of these numbers, and I want you to think about people differently. So the first way, and I wrote about this in my new book that came out, and it flew off, and it's moving really well, is the Leader Launchpad. And one of the things I highlighted in that book is I hate even the words HR. I want you to start thinking human capital management. People are assets. They're not resources. Resources we use, assets, we find the very best ones, we keep them, and we grow them. It's a very different philosophy, and it may seem like a nuance to you, but many companies are treating their people like resources, and they're not realizing their assets. And so what I also mean by assets then is I'm going to change some of your paradigm shifts on many times I don't care what their hourly rate is, and you're going to see why. Many times, I'm not worried about individual payroll costs. What I want to do is I want to make sure I'm getting a return on my assets. So for every dollar I pay in payroll, how much do I get back in gross profit? For every dollar I pay in payroll, how many dollars are coming back in net profit? That's what I want to know before that. And so if we can change that ratio, we're going to do well. So 60 to 70% of most companies' income statements are made up of people. That's your main cost. So when you're starting to move around some of those other little costs, your main problem is in the people area, and most times you have too many of them. You're just throwing bodies at stuff, and you don't need to. And if you had the right bodies, those right bodies would do 2 to 3 times everybody else. And I need less people doing more. That's what you want to achieve. So the first thing I want you to think about is I want you to think about the cost of a mishire. Who has read Top Grading or who? So I got trained by Brad on how to hire the right people because I realized this was a huge problem for me growing up in business. And one of the things that Brad and his son, Brad Smart, who read Top Grading, and Jeff Smart, who wrote Who, his son, they did all this research and they figured out that when you do a mishire, it's a supervisor on up, it's costing you anywhere between 4 and 24 times salary. So when I use 5, it's very conservative. And I can tell you that every time I've made a mishire leader, I go back and I test it, and I can find the mistakes those people made, the money I lost, the customers we lost, the reputation damage that happened, and it cost me, I can tell you one coach we hired, and he only lasted 90 days, cost me $500,000. I didn't pay him near that. All right, so the 5 is very conservative, and he wasn't even a leader. So getting this is right. And then I went back, so where I got the labor efficiency ratio, some of you have heard of that. I am a big fan of a book called Simple Numbers. Greg Crabtree, he's a colleague of mine, accountant, and he started figuring out that we needed to stop looking at labor as a percentage of revenue, and we had to start looking at it as a multiplier. So I went back to him and I said, listen, I've got clients across over 100 industries over time. What is a good benchmark for managers and for the direct labor, the people on the front lines? And he said, if you use around 2.5, very rarely does it go below that if we're not hiring stupidly. And then if you use 5 on manager, you'll be very conservative. So the reason I'm sharing you that number is when you have to fill this out, you're not going to like the number. And I want you to know where the multiplier came from. So what we figured out then was every time we hired a $50,000 person and we got it wrong, multiply that times 2.5 times. That's what it's costing your business. And then open positions. So this is what we did at Irby and what I like to do everywhere. So most people won't hire recruiters. They're like, man, they're too expensive. They're not good enough. And then they take 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, and sometimes longer to hire. Actually, a couple of years ago, I had a client, a whole year he suffered. 2 key leaders he wouldn't hire. And finally, I'm like, do you realize how much this has cost you? We actually figured out, because he didn't have those 2 leaders, it cost him $2.5 million in profit. I said, okay, so now why haven't you filled this position? He says, well, our 2 best candidates for both positions wanted $25,000 more per year than we're used to paying. All right, so $50,000, $2.5 million. They hired those 2 guys in the next 2 weeks. They went back, they were still in the market, they hired them, and they captured back that money. So what I want you to realize is there's a cost. If it's open, would any of you fill a position if it wasn't going to yield value for your company? Hopefully none of you will raise your hand. All right? So because we're adding them, we're expecting at least 2.5 times their salary. They're either going to do it directly or they're going to enable somebody else to produce that, and that's why we're bringing them in. So what I want you to realize, for a $50,000 position, it's costing you $481 a day, $2,400 a week, and $11,000 per month. How long do you want to keep that position open? That's profit. That's the profit you should make. And so when we go into most companies, they have way too many positions open for way too long, and we just want you to realize that's a huge leak. A couple other things I want you to realize. Salary doesn't matter. So just take Costco or Walmart. So Costco pays almost $21 an hour. That's almost 66% higher than Walmart. Look at their stats here. So they generate $62,000 revenue per employee, actually about 3 times. And then their profit per square foot, double. So you say, well, wait a minute. They got all this labor, all this cost. They're paying 66% more. We see this happening over and over again. Think about contribution, not cost. I got to tell you, even looking at the P&L, I don't talk about revenues and expenses. I talk about revenues and investments. Every dollar I spend in my P&L should be an investment. Otherwise, I'm just burning money. So same thing here. So the other thing is you'll notice by hiring better, and they probably do a much better job of training, turnover is much lower. This is really important. So it's important for 2 reasons. So they do a better job of hiring at Costco. But one of the things I started learning over time, I once wound up owning a logistics company. I got in there, and 18 of the 22 employees were just wrong people. My new partner just did a horrible job in the people area. And I'm like, listen, we want to grow a lot, and we can't even move forward. We actually need less people. But then I started running my head, so we were only 22 employees at the time, right? 2 of us, and then 20 other people. And I'm like, God, if we have to fill 18 positions, we're going to die. And if we get them wrong, we're going to die. So we had to figure out how to make a scalable recruiting process, but we also had to figure out something I want you to notice on the screen. So if you hire 11 people, and you have the success rate of the national average is 25%, it will take 31 hires before you hire 10 right people. Let that sink in for a second. 31 people. But if you get to the point where you're right 75% of the time, I only have to hire 11. So that's a huge link in a lot of businesses, and I want you to have this on your mind as you go out. You need to become grandmasters at selecting people. And if you don't, you're burning a lot of money because now every one of those people is a mishire. And so while they're there, you're still losing the 2.5 times. So now we've covered payroll. Now we've covered hiring success rate. I want to define performing for you. And when I give you the tools at the end, you're going to be able to download. We've got a much better tool than this, but at least you have it on the piece of paper. The only way somebody's performing is if they're living every one of your core values consistently. And folks, you cannot be half pregnant. They can't be kind of pregnant, right? So they can't be kind of living your core values. They either are or they aren't. And then the second thing I want you to realize is if they're missing any of their KPIs consistently, they're also not performing. How many of you have at least 1 or 2 KPIs for every position in your company and those people see it and know it? So this is actually a high number for the room. So if you're not doing that for every position in your company, you can't even do this right. You're wild-ass guessing. So you need to be able to know whether they're giving you that actually return, that performance you expect, and you need to know whether they're living. And by the way, not living the core values is worse than the lower performance because they infect everybody else. Not performing does slow everybody else down, but it's not as bad as the core values, but any of them, they're not performing. So typically when we do this with clients, rarely, and actually I don't think ever, is at least 10% of your employees and management not performing at any given point in time. Most of the time, it's at least 20, and the first time we do it, the shock is 50%. Now, that doesn't mean you have to fire 50% of your people or 20% of your people. Once you have that information and you're armed with it, you can act. And you'll watch. So we've seen companies go from 50% non-performance to 20 and 10% non-performance. They don't add any extra employees, and profit goes way up. Growth goes way up. All we did was make the standards clear, demanded it, and made it non-negotiable. And as soon as you do that, watch your numbers go up. It's going to be like magic. It's kind of like, where did the money show up? Because it's sitting there, you're keeping too many non-performers. All right, so now I want to do some calculations. So on the sheet, remember at the very top, the first boxes, that was just all the people boxes. What I want you to do is I just want you to do a quick estimate. We don't have time in the room for today for you to evaluate your entire team. Some of you got a lot of people, some of you have a few. I want you to go back and do that later, and actually I'd rather you use our super tool, which really lays it out in more detail, but you can use that simple tool to start with. I want you to assume that you have 20% of your non-supervisor and manager workers not performing, and then if 20% of your leaders are not performing. And I want you to write down on the piece of paper inside the box what that number is. So where that will go is, if you look in the box towards the left, we're going to actually do this for first leaders and managers. Those first 2 rows, the first box is the number of people not performing. This is just a swag, but I want you to get a sense for dollars here. And some of you may fight and say, listen, I don't have that. GE, there was a reason they implemented the 10% rule. They knew they had more than 10% that should have been upgraded and never were. So they just forced it and said at the end of every year, you're going to get rid of the 10% bottom performers. Because they weren't bottom performers, they were not performing. They were just ratcheting everybody up every year. So what I want you to do is I want you to put that, and I want you to put an average salary. And I know you might have a wide swag here, but everybody that's not a supervisor or above, what's the average salary? You're going to write that down in the box next to it. And then for the managers, you take across the chasm, take out the CEO's number. It's probably somewhere around 100, 75 to 100. Put that number in there. So let me give you a second to do that. Number of people, directionally correct, not performing, both managers and non-managers. What's the average salary? Make a guess. So now you're going to multiply the number of people by the number of non-performers. You're going to do the managers times 5, and you're going to do everyone else times 2.5. And no one's going to grade your paper, so don't worry about it. So if I'm now correct, anybody who has 20 or 30 employees, you may have a $1 million number already. Anybody have a $1 million number on the piece of paper? $1 million. Anybody else? Some of you are still calculating. So a lot of you will have just $1 million sitting right there. The next thing I want you to do is I want you to think about how many open positions do you have on average? Actually, how many open positions do you have right now? Write that number in the box in terms of open positions. Then next to that, I want you to write the number of the average salary for those open positions. We're going to multiply that one times 2.5. That's to get a fire underneath your you-know-whats, to fill them quicker. Don't fill them wrong. Fill them right quicker, because that should be a decent-sized number. And this is, of course, assuming what you have open now is kind of a consistent number going forward. And then many times that number goes down even when our clients are growing, because now they have more people hiring right the first time. And when you hire right the first time, I don't have as many open positions. And by the way, the longer you have people because they're performing, the better they perform. It's a domino effect. Numbers just start showing up. Any questions on that before I go forward? Because those are some important things. That's mainly what I want to cover in the people area. I don't see any hands raising there. No hands around here. So this is somber. And Jason mentioned earlier, he says, this may turn some people's stomachs. Like I said, many of the companies we deal with, that number is 50%. If we can just get the ones that should be performing to performing, it's worth a lot of money, right? All right, so that's the top. Eventually this adds to the bottom. Now, the one thing I didn't do with you is I didn't turn it into cash. I'd rather a spreadsheet do that, but basically what you have on the top right-hand corner is you need to know what your effective tax rate is. Most people just use 20% because they're S-corps and it goes off and they don't know exactly. Directionally, 20% effective tax rate. If you know it's higher, you'd use higher. Basically what you would do is, what you have there is a profit number. What you didn't do is you'd convert that to a cash number by just subtracting the tax rate, the taxes you're going to pay on that profit. And that gets you to cash. So very simple way to move from your P&L to cash, assuming it's collected and so forth. And that's what you would get your bottom line. All right, so now I'm going to take you through the rest of the areas, and the logic through all the rest of the areas is different. So I moved all the people stuff to the top. So none of the ideas you're going to give me going forward is hiring different people, right? You've already covered that in the top. I don't want to double dip, and even still, it may double dip a little bit. We've covered the people problem. Now I want to get to, in all 7 areas, what you want to be thinking about is those 3 levers. Anybody remember what the 3 levers were for the 7 areas? It's okay. People, which we covered on the top. Reducing mistakes. Innovating your business model. It's always good to repeat yourself a lot, particularly when you're spewing out as much as I'm spewing out right now. So the only 2 things we're going to worry about here on the bottom is the mistakes happening in those line items. So the pukers is an example of a mistake. All right? It's no longer you probably have the right people and they're not doing the right things. It's a mistake in your sales process, right? And that would be an example of why don't we close those leaks? And I'm going to give you some examples of all of these. And then how can we change our business model so that we are either doing the same things differently from our competition, or we're doing it the same things at a cheaper cost. And so now you're starting to think about innovating on how to do that. So let's talk about the first one, strategy. So somebody came up to me earlier and said, what is my core, my real superpower? One of the biggest reasons we're able to move the needle much faster than most companies is the strategy. And you look at the companies up here, and this probably gets overused, but everybody remembers all of these companies, and you have to remember them. They were Goliaths, leaders in their industry, don't exist. Actually, I got offered a job at Blockbuster. I turned it down. I told the CEO, you're going to go out of business. He laughed at me, and they went out of business. I said, when they contacted me to be chief operating officer, I was looking at Netflix, and I'm like, this business model's gone, and you have all that rent, you're dead. It's like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. You're the wrong guy. I said, okay. But you're not moving. And in my discussions with him, and the reason I pushed that envelope is he was not willing to change the way in which they had their current business model. They were so used to it working that they couldn't fathom, and they didn't want to do the hard work of moving with the market. So strategy is real important. I like to have a common definition of strategy. So usually if I go around the room and ask everybody their definition of strategy, I get a different idea of what strategy is. Strategy, my favorite one is Michael Porter. I actually got to work with his consulting firm when we hired them way back when I was the head of strategy at Ryder. And his definition is deliberately choosing a different set of activities to deliver a unique mix of value. There's some really, really important words in there because most companies confuse operational effectiveness with strategy. Now, don't get me wrong. Operational effectiveness is about being the best, and it's necessary, but it's not sufficient. Because here's the problem, is there's more supply than there is demand in every industry. And if you look right now, if you went back about 10 years ago, there were probably, I think, only 35 to 50 companies considered unicorns. There's now 500. All of the unicorns were companies that did something very different in their industry. They transformed their industry, and then they were rewarded. So for those of you who don't know what a unicorn is, it's a private company that achieves a valuation of over $1 billion in revenue. Went from 35 to 500. So in every industry, including yours right now, you've got to start asking, how are you all going to be put out of business? And then that's the business you need to create. And when you do, that's how you get the $1 billion valuations. So what I want to make sure is you're thinking about strategy, because I know when we have a strategy problem, when that percentage growth rate is not at least 20% every year, and or 3 times. So right now, you all probably have really good growth rates, but you don't have a great strategy unless your growth rate is 3 times everybody else in this room. And you're consistently delivering that every year in the percentage growth rate. So obviously that'll go down if the winds change, but you still always should be 3 times the market. But what we found out is regardless of the business, regardless of the industry, the best players always did usually 25% or more, even in declining industries. So we use, you're going to notice in the sheet, 20%. So you can do this on the side, because right now, not enough of you even know your percentage. And those of you who don't even know your percentage have no idea what the market is right now. So what I want to do is I want to share with you, this was a real client. We sat down, they had $10 million of revenue. Their growth rate was 5%. We went out and we looked at the market, and they said, you know, they're growing with the market. Everybody else in the industry is growing at 5%. So we said, all right, can we achieve 20% growth? And they said, oh, definitely. We're just not doing it. So I said, all right, what is the value of that extra 15%? So if they're missing 15% in growth just in this year alone, that's $1.5 million in revenue. Their gross margin was 50%. That's $750,000 in profit. The effective tax rate we used was 20%. So that 15% was $600,000 in cash profit. By just only focusing on operational excellence, they were losing $600,000. Fast forward the compound rate of this year after year. So I grow 15%. Then off of that number, I grow another 15%. So over 3 years, if they didn't solve this problem, it was a $5.2 million revenue issue. It was a $2.6 million gross margin issue, $2 million cash issue. So for those of you who are like, man, strategies for the bigger companies, that's all theory. It's real. And if you don't address it, you're leaving money on the table. And many of you won't address it because you're fat and happy. So basically what you're saying is good is the enemy of great. You're saying mediocrity is okay. When you're growing 2 to 3 times the market, have 5 times the profit margin, now you've gotten out of mediocrity. So that's strategy. So I want to talk a little bit about price, and this is one that you may want to write something down now, and we're probably going to stop and have you work on it. So we already got a price idea earlier in the room, and I'm sure you guys missed it. But first I'm going to give you the Costco story. Do you guys know where 75% of Costco's profit comes from? The membership fee. So early on when they did that, they were like, this is, why would you bother everybody with this $150 fee or $75 fee, whatever it was at the time? It just seems silly and it's just going to piss people off. Well, still to this day, it represents 75% of their profits and funds all of the growth of the new stores. One decision, one little fee up front, the margins are slim, that's 100% profit they put in their pocket. So you guys have a fee right now. So you all have these properties that the titles are taking much longer. Sometimes it could take months to clear them. You should charge a fee for that. Those people are getting much, much extra service from you. You're adding more value to those people than you are the other people. And for that extra value, you should be able to charge for it. And 100% of that number will go to your bottom line. So there's lots of different places. I just wanted to use that as an example. There are lots of ways in which we can learn from Costco and add to our price. Most companies are underpricing. And so when I heard Steve's video, first thing I said to him when he came by to me is, I said, you have a leak. One of those people that gave him a wonderful testimonial, what did they say? They said, really, they basically said that you're a great deal. They didn't say amazing value. His job is to be the highest price in the market and deliver enough value so you'd pay it. Hey, you guys are going to do the same thing, and I'm going to challenge him on that because it's definitely sounded to me like you're undercharging. And they're getting all the benefits from it, and you should benefit as much as they do. So obviously you won't pay him if he doesn't deliver. But if he does, he should get his fair value, and you guys in your business should get your fair value. So I'd like you to go around your table right now and talk about, some of you are already charging fees in certain ways. Some of you have this bias that fees are bad, but in certain cases, it's not all deals, but there's certain cases where you can get it. So go ahead, take a couple minutes. Okay, so now what I want you to do is if you have an idea, I want you to put a value down for it. What I want you to do now is I want you to put a value next to any fee ideas. Just because you're writing it on a piece of paper does not mean you're committing to it yet. But I want you to say, all right, so take my title example. How many of your deals in any given month is a title problem? And if you were to use that as an example, then if we charge $1,000 for everyone that had a title problem, if it's 500 deals during the year, then 500 times 1,000 is $500,000 to your bottom line. Now I know hopefully you don't have 500 that are horrible titles, but so for any one of these, I want you to make sure that you write a dollar amount next to it, because remember, if you write down an idea, there's no dollar next to it, baloney. So go ahead and do that for a second, and then I'm going to move us along. And by the way, if no one writes anything there, you're being timid. If no one writes anything down in that section, this group is being timid, and this is not a timid group. Okay, so now I'm going to take you further down. We're still in the sales area, so that gets written in that top, the box right underneath the people section is that. Now I want to talk about a process mistake in sales. So we talked about the pukers. I have never gone to a company where they've got the sales process 100% dialed in for every single team member. Never happened, never will. Go to this company called Treatment Solutions Network. I helped Jim, the owner of this company. We wound up actually changing the business so much in 12 months that he got some crazy offers. The biggest change was the sales process. So basically what happened with the sales process is I just asked him a simple ratio. I said, all right, you get leads from 2 different places. And Treatment Solutions Network is a company, if somebody has a drug or alcohol abuse problem, then you get detoxed and you get sent to these 12-step type companies, which my client was. Hopefully no one in the room in here has been to one. It's a very tough business. So basically what we figured out was when they got a website lead, they were only closing 20% of those. And then the majority of their leads were actually being referred by the physicians. The physicians were saying, hey, listen, this is a great facility for you. Call them up. They were only closing 35% of those. And for me as an outsider, you know, it's always good to be an outsider in the industry. I'm sitting there, you've got the rookie smarts, and I'm like, does it make sense to you that people call you for help, they're on their deathbed, their doctor's recommending you, and then you don't get them? It just doesn't make sense to me. So I said, I want to just sit on your sales floor. I want to see what's going on, because they had these, what they called intake coordinators, but it was sales. I just want to watch what they're doing. And I noticed a couple of people in the room where they were filling out this form and they were on the phone for a long period of time. And then everybody else, the calls were like 5 minutes. Which one do you think actually was closing a higher percentage of the deals? The ones that were spending more time really getting to know the history of these people, getting to understand. The other people were like, all right, what's your insurance information? All right, let me get back to you. Let me make sure insurance is going to cover it. You think that person's calling you back? It took so much courage for them to call you to begin with to get help. They either went somewhere else or they, worse, didn't get help, and God knows what happened to them. So what we did is we actually made it mandatory that every time a call came in, you had to fill out this form. It was already there. Mandatory. Every single time. There was only one exception. If the person that was calling you wasn't the person that needed the help because they were still passed out, you could get away with that one. But everybody else, there's no excuse not to be on the phone with this person. Their close ratio in 30 days shot up to 60%. And then they had a new problem. They didn't have enough beds. They were actually able to cut their sales force in half. And then they had to figure out their growth problem because now they were closing at such a high rate that they didn't know what to do with the people. They started selling out those opportunities to their competitors. So it created another revenue stream because they couldn't even take care of the people. So they would just feed it, intake them, and then put them in somebody else's facility. That was our solution to it. Took a company that was hemorrhaging cash to $1.9 million of cash in 90 days. Broken sales process. So that's just an example. So in your sales area, where is your biggest mistake? Do you have a low conversion ratio? Is your conversion ratio 25% on good opportunities to come in, and it should be 40? What is it? First of all, identify the problem, then identify you're going to go after the process, but what is it worth? I think I just got him a ton of business. So I want you to come up with one idea now, work in the table, one process change you can make to fix broken sales problems. Go for it. And all right. By a show of hands, how many of you, by a show of hands, how many of you think your conversion ratios should and could be higher? And I want you to think about that 1% rule. So if you did 1% or 5% or 10% more, well, you know how many you're getting through. If you did 10% better, you can calculate this number pretty easily. And then what you're going to use is you're going to use the gross profit on the deal, not the revenue. Because remember, we want to get to what's going to go to the bottom line. And then if there's going to be a sales amount next to it, subtract the sales cost as well. What we want is the net profit value of increasing conversions, we'll say 10%. And by the way, I've never met a company that couldn't improve their conversion ratios 10%. Question is how badly do you want it? And it also has to look at the other options you have when you get done with the sheet or done with your planning. You should have a lot of different ideas, and then you're trying to pick which ones are going to be best, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So I'm going to keep telling stories, because to me the stories gives you an idea of the things to do, and then you're going to notice whether you're in any one of the sales, direct cost of sales as you move down, overhead as a percentage of sales, you'll see each one of those areas as the different areas. You're going to use the same mentality. Where's my process mistake? Where is my operational mistake? So I'm going to say this was a mistake, but I'm also going to say it's an innovation. So I had a client, and basically restoration industry, so I figure this will be a good one for you guys. And you guys are all familiar with Matterport? A lot of you know what Matterport is. So there was a Matterport, and there's one other technology, and our client was not using any technology. And what we realized is they were living on average, and we actually picked it up, by implementing Matterport properly and the other technology, we're able to raise their gross profit and net profit 600 basis points. Just by using technology that already existed. You didn't have to create it. You just had to take the time to learn it and then make it mandatory in every job. And as soon as they did that, 600 basis points showed up. Now, what I will say, though, is that money was always there, so it was also a mistake. And you know the way the insurance companies work, they make it very hard for you to go through the formulas of figuring out how to get paid. Well, this eliminated that problem. But what it meant is they were underestimating every single job by 600 basis points on average. So what I'd like you to do is, and now you can do this in the sales area, you can do this in the direct cost of sales. I'll give you a little bit more time. Make sure you're using this time to come up with ideas, come up with dollars. You've already covered a lot of this, I understand, over the last few days. So you should be taking pieces of what you've already talked about in the other meetings and just moving them around and putting dollar amounts next to them. If I fix X process problem, it's worth Y. If I fix A process innovation, if I actually implement that innovation or that technology, it's worth B. That's what you want to do. So let's look at both the revenue area, if you have any, the direct cost area, any, and start coming up with as many ideas as you can in your table from what you've already done to fill out this sheet some more with some dollar amounts. Go get them. All right, if I'm not mistaken, I'm going to be keeping us from lunch, so people are going to start getting antsy. Let's bring it back in. Let's bring it back in. So one of the things I want to make sure you all get, and the reason I'm not spending like buku hours on this, is my job is to make sure you know what to do after you leave this room. I want you to make sure you know how to fill this out, the thought process that go behind it, because then you're going to want your whole leadership teams usually together to sit down and figure this out. So all I want to make sure is by the time I leave, if you're not sure how to fill this out, what to do, then I didn't do my job yet, and let's not leave the room until you know what to do. But at the end of the day, I just wanted to get your whistle going and get this talking going. You've done a lot of this stuff. So the one area that typically we don't think about enough is the whole gaining leverage in the overhead. So when I talked about you have leverage when revenue is growing and either overhead's flat or in my client's case it actually shrunk, how do you do that? You start thinking about, so one of the things we did with the client that we shrunk their overhead is we're using a lot of virtual assistants. So there are a lot of things they were doing in-house that they don't need to do in-house anymore. Even in the restoration industry, a lot of people are going to China and actually having the majority of their estimates being done overseas for like $5 an hour. And we looked at their overhead department, and we started looking at what some of these people did. And there's sites like Upwork and other companies like that. And actually, there's a guy, he comes here as well. virtual assistant company, and I think, hmm? What? No, that's not the one. There's another one somebody mentioned yesterday. Rocket Station, there you go. He's actually in my other group, and he'd be pissed off at me for mentioning Upwork and not mentioning his. So it's fine. I'm going to make sure I pulled it up in case he shows up. I don't get in trouble. Actually, they're awesome. Out of the two, I hear a lot more success actually with Rocket Station than I do with Upwork. It's a little bit more hit or miss. They're very consistently helping people put the right people. So we looked at all the things administration did, and we said, which ones do you really need to do here? And it was almost none of it. I have a client right now in the multifamily property space that we outsourced their entire accounting department overseas. So he had like 10 people in accounting. He's got one now. And then everything else is overseas, so it's costing him a tenth of what it did yesterday. The only thing he has left in the States is the CFO, which he needed anyways. And the CFO decides what they do, checks their work, makes sure everything's happening. And it's actually being done better, which is crazy. So you just have to learn how to work with virtual workers. And thanks to COVID, we learned how to do that. So what I want you to think about in this area is what are some innovative ways so that you can now dramatically change the game. One of the examples that I will share for your industry that we started toying with at Irby, but we don't have an answer to it, is to me, I don't like a lot of management. Actually, one of the biggest mistakes I see in corporations that used to drive me nuts is I always count the number of layers. So I worked in a company where we actually had 13 layers of people. The majority of those layers spent all of their time justifying their existence by having everybody else below them create reports. Then they analyzed reports, had meetings around the reports, but they did nothing to really grow the company. They did nothing to serve customers. And so every time we have a billion-dollar company, first thing I'm like, so how do we cut out 2 layers? And what does that work to you? And by the way, the higher layers always get paid a lot more than the lower level. So I can get usually 3 frontline workers for what it cost me 1 manager. So we have to teach self-accountability in organizations so the frontline people are acting like owners and they are self-governing themselves. And there's several books out on this topic. So I would rather use team leads and frontline workers in either around jobs or whatever where they're highly accountable and lower the number of, as you grow and expand, not add as many managers as you do today and change the ratio formula. So one of the things we're trying to do is change the ratio of number of employees to managers, number of employees to supervisors. And many times we are increasing management, and then what management is doing is it's causing a bunch of people that just wait around to be told what to do. But now if they didn't have anybody around to tell them what to do, what would they do? What you did when you started your business, they figure it out and they get it done. So start thinking about how do we flatten your pyramid? How do we extend the pyramid? So what I want you to do now is I want you to think about ways or talk about ways in which you've reduced cost structure in the overhead area, that general and administrative expense. You know, the people that really, for the most part, don't make your customers, don't really make you a lot of money. They make a lot of bureaucracy. Go for it. All right, let's get going. We're getting into the home stretch. All right, come on back, everyone. Actually, I love the dialogue here. I just see dollar signs popping off the tables. I'm loving it. And that is very productive. But let's be respectful to everybody. Everyone, please, quiet. So what I want you to do with this is I want you to remember the 21 ways. I want you to go to all 7 areas. All right? I want you to come up with at least one idea in each box section because it's very important to get as many ideas out on the table. So if you accumulate everything you have from when you started on Monday to today, if you're like me when I come to stuff like this and I'm in 2 masterminds, I have pages and pages and I'm just like, God, where to start? So what I want you to do is I want you to take all of those ideas. I want you to put dollar amounts next to them. I want you to sit with your leadership team to see if you can come up with more ideas. And then I want you to do this. So what I've found with prioritization is we don't have the right context. And the context you need for prioritization is there's two dimensions you need to think about when you decide this is what our main focus is. So the word priority comes from the word prior. So when we say we're creating our priorities, we're saying these are the things that have to happen first. Normally what I find is we say these are the things that have to happen first, and then everybody exits a room and they go stage left and they do something else. I want you to realize that when you decide on quarterly and annual priorities, you're deciding these are the things are more important above everything else, and because you do that, that's where you're going to capture the most money for your company. The other thing I realized was there were two dimensions I needed to think about when I did this. And so I was talking to somebody at dinner last night about how we as entrepreneurs, we've kind of become numb. We don't even recognize risk. We just see opportunity, we go after it, we start running it. And some of us have been burned a few times because we didn't think enough about what's the risk in what we're doing? What is the likely impact? Not what's the possible, what is the likely impact if I do this? What is the degree of difficulty to go after whatever you wrote on the piece of paper? And I want you to think about it this way, and I try to come up with some fun ways to think about it. So to me, too often I see stuff on people's priority lists that I call their equivalent of chasing bubbles. So a lot of us have kids. I remember the kids at the parties, you blow the bubbles. They were excited for about 5 minutes, and they were like, off to the next thing. And then if you ask them at the end of the party, what was your favorite part, you will never hear the bubbles. All right, they won't even remember the bubbles because there's other things that had a higher impact for them to enjoy their parties. And many of the things you're deciding to do, it's because it's really easy and it just bugs you. But by putting a dollar amount with it, now you're saying, so what? And if the so what is not a big enough impact, then the hell with it. The second box that I have on the bottom on the right is chasing squirrels. So I used to have a dog, we named him Kramer after Seinfeld, because he used to run into walls. From the day he was born, the dog was just a spaz. And a big dog too, 65 pounds. I don't know how we didn't have holes in the wall. But when we used to get him, I got him, actually you get trained. I got the dog trained, and we'd go walking, he's right at my heel, everything's great until a squirrel came. That dog was like Houdini and figured out how to get out of the harness, would run away, go get it. Now, I want to tell you, in 15 years, Kramer never caught a squirrel. But I always question, so now look about degree of difficulty. Now, here's the question. If Kramer caught a squirrel, what the hell was he going to do with it? He might be excited and have the adrenaline rush for about 10 seconds, but then he's going to realize, this is not what I eat. What do I do with this thing? Oh, fun, and throw it off the side. So we don't want to chase squirrels. What we want to do is we want to find the low-hanging fruit that has high impact. Many times, look at the high impact and how easy it was to fix the sales process in Treatment Solutions Network. 30 days, all we did was need to change one procedure, which everybody was supposed to be doing everywhere anyways. And it changed the numbers. That's low-hanging fruit, huge impact. But see, most of the stuff that's really worthwhile is significant, which is why you keep pushing it off. It's really hard to do. It's going to take multiple quarters. Sometimes it takes multiple years. I owned a software company, and it took us 3 years before we can get a product to market. Significant project with huge impact. Without that project, obviously, we don't make any money. So you've got to figure out, and you've got to now take, and so Ren and those guys know I love sticky, so I always have stuff up all over the walls. We got like 1,000 ideas, and we're like, well, we can't do all those ideas. We've got to organize them. The way I think you should do it is metaphorically, if not exactly, using that sheet you have there, and I like it up on a wall with flip charts so it's nice and big and everybody can move stickies around. Put all your ideas up there and figure out which quadrant it's in. Then I want you to pick the ones that make the most sense now. Some of them you need to start now if you want it done in 2 years, so you better get it done. And then some of them, it's like, this is burning so much money, hole in my pocket, we can't afford not to do it now. And I don't want you, so my goal for you is no more than 3 priorities in a quarter. Now, when I usually say that to new clients, we can never get down to 3 priorities. They just see too many things to do, and they see, well, I got a team of 50, so we should be able to do 5. By the way, 5 never usually ever gets done. If they're usually meaty and they're up on the top, usually 1 or 2 of them take up all the management resources. And something I learned from the late, great Peter Drucker was, and you all know this as you moved up, before we start the week, 90% of our time is already decided between customers, meetings, and everything else. The higher up you go, the more likely you're close to that 90%. So that means out of your week, 10% is discretionary. Same with the people that report to you. So if you work a 50-hour a week, and God love you if you've gotten down to that or below, then you only have 5 hours to work on these strategic, significant projects because your day job is going to suck up the rest of the time. So if you put too many priorities in there, it's too much for the 5 hours. You're just going to get overwhelmed, and you may even give up. So what we want to do is we want to make sure, we want to ask every leader, once we set the priorities, how they're going to spend their 5 hours a week working on these things. Not doing email, not doing other stuff, but working on the stuff that you put on the top. Metaphorically, what I want you to be done after you've done all the trade-offs is we'll be able to put a triangle and just cover out the stuff that, nice, but not worth it. Because you're going to see you have too many stickies up top, and then you have some tough decisions to make. So your job is to go and fill out that form as much as possible. And I want to give you, a goal. So I once worked with a company. They were $250 million in revenue, and were break even. And they outsourced. Actually, they were the outsourced company that emergencies rooms were outsourced to for hospitals. So we get in the room. They had 24 leaders. We had 24 leaders in the room. We actually broke them out into teams. Each one got a different section. And the CEO said, listen, whichever team comes up with the biggest dollar amount item, we're going to send you all on a trip. Well, the team that won came up with $125 million item. A 10% net profit in one item. So in healthcare, as you know, just like in restoration and other industries, the insurance companies just make your life miserable. And they make it so complicated that you're likely not to check the right boxes, and therefore, even though you did the work, you don't get paid for it. So what they figured out, and what a couple of brilliant people figured out is the largest healthcare provider that they did most of the work under changed their forms. And there was one box that should have been checked every single time and was rarely ever being checked. By checking that one box was worth $25 million. Now, I want you to picture this company with this very simple idea. Every morning they did a daily huddle, and every single person in the company was in a daily huddle. What do you think they talked about? Check the box, check the box, check the box, check the box. 25 was actually turned out to be worth more than 25 million because they found a couple more boxes that were consistently not being checked. That company eventually sold for a huge multiple about 2 years later. That was a big part of, so it was not only worth $25 million, multiply that times 6, which was the multiple they sold them for. Just by going through this exercise, this works in every business, and if you're not adding at least 10% to your bottom line, and it should be more like 50, you didn't work hard enough on this. I want you to go back to your teams, and I want you to do that. So I want to close off with, so I told you what to do. I delivered what I promised. I told you I'm going to teach you how to look at your story differently, wider, broader, and see the whole story. How'd I do? Uh-oh, I'm not hearing anything. All right. How many of you, after we talked about the 21 ways to and we didn't even finish the sheet, can honestly say you have $1 million? How many people? I was hoping for more, but at least that's a good amount of the room actually have $1 million worth of ideas right from this room. So now, here's the great part. All you have to do is go and act. See, if you go through these days and you don't actually act on the ideas on the piece of paper that you know there's dollar amounts next to, then you just wasted your time. So make sure you go back and this week, make sure you decide on which ones need to make your priority list. I promised you that you guys could download the tools. If you go to howardmshore.com, I actually created a special resources section for you guys. So /resources, you will get more than the electronic version of this. You'll get the paper version if you want, the electronic Excel version of this, but you'll get access to all of our other tools that tie into my new book, The Leader Launchpad, which came out in September. I think we're over 15,000 copies already and still growing, and I'm looking forward to getting more momentum on that. But you'll see all the tools, and I'm certain there's going to be another one or two tools in there. Even if you're using EOS, you're going to say, "Wow, this would be really helpful for us." And then if you read The Leaky Bucket, which we already gave you, that'll tell you what to do with it, some of them. And then if it's not in there, it's in the other book, and so you can self-implement. I want to challenge you, everyone in this room, to get results just like Titan. 6 times the industry average growth rate, 5 times the net profit margin, 3 times the employee engagement, and the 2 top owners work in half. That's the gauntlet I want in everybody. I want you to achieve what's on that piece of paper, but I want you to work less. So we started out, Jason mentioned I was scaling up coach. I actually helped Vern with writing the book, so I'm in the credits. I've been affiliated with the organization since before they used to certify coaches. I'm one of the early coaches in the system. I realized there needed to be a deeper, better way for the companies that were really growing rapidly. So our methodology includes everything from EOS to scaling up to simple numbers from Greg Crabtree. There's another organization which we spun out of scaling up called 3HAG Way because there was not enough strategy. So we implement that strategic system. I wrote the book because to me, I'm a heat-seeking missile for money. I love cash. And I wanted you all to be fired up. Anybody who read that book, anybody who reads it and is honest knows they're leaving significant money on the table, and awareness creates action. Oblivion creates no action. So I want to encourage you to take a look at both of those books. One of them we've already given you for free. And what I want to share with you is kind of what's in there. So what I realized as a CEO, and as I mentioned, I've done everything from startup to 20 billion. We are all running and we're responsible for a business ecosystem. And the healthier that ecosystem, actually the more engaged everybody is, and the easier it is on us as leaders. And all of us have the same 6 systems. So the CEO is the aquifer to that system. If you don't buy into, and you have too much pride in, fire, ready, aim, then you're already poisoning the well. Our job is to unlock the true potential of everybody else who works for us, not be the doers. Our job is to get everybody else to want to own it, and then our job is to get peak performance out of them. And I want to change, by the way, the manager title to coach. Everybody that has a manager title is a coach. And what I realized is the foundation is the cultural system there on the bottom. And then we need, instead of great individuals, we need cohesive teams. So we do a lot of stuff with Pat Lancioni's work, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, and we believe that we want to create great teams, not just at the leadership, all the way across your organization. Human capital management, I've already defined that for you. It's critical that we get very, very good at getting the right people in the right seats, doing the right things, and then help them grow and develop with the company. In the center of all of it, you have the strategic system that was on the top. And then the execution system, which is making sure that when you have that unique and valuable position in the market, that you're actually delivering on it. Cash is, as I said, is a consequence of how well we do those other systems. So one of the things that I learned was I have never met a business that is mastering all 6 systems. Most of us are usually struggling in at least 2. And there's always degrees of increase in mastery, so remember the 1% rule, to increase all of this. But it all plays off of each other, so you can't just be good at execution, because then you're great at running circles or just making right turns. So if we don't have a good cultural system, then what happens when you try to recruit? The best people aren't interested in what you have to offer. And if you don't have a good cultural system, the best people leave because they don't like working there. So most companies I go into that are having problems recruiting, usually we find a problem in the cultural system. And so we've got to fix that first. And then when you have the right people in the right seats, they need the right strategic system. Otherwise, what are they delivering? They're just delivering the same thing as everybody else. So all of these things play off of each other. So I want you to start thinking your business as an ecosystem and realize whether you like it or not, if you own a business, you're managing all 6 of those systems. The last thing I want to leave you with is, so I personally have a coach. They have different coaches, but I've had a coach for the last 20 years. My wife will tell you, and actually anybody who works for me, I'm a much better version of myself thanks to these people. Actually, when I look back, I don't even recognize myself. And a lot of it is them pushing me to realize when I had blinders on. They were pushing me when I stopped and I didn't even realize I didn't have the foot on the gas. They challenged me to become a better leader. They challenged me to be different. And one of the things that I run into when I go to a lot of companies is most people are like really proud of their team. And you probably should be. But you have to realize is they're leaving stuff on the table. And there was a book that came out, The $1 Trillion Coach. I don't know if any of you read it. But that was written by one of the founders of Google, Eric Schmidt. And what he said in that book, I've actually recognized for myself as a leader, how much more I generated. He said that if they didn't have Bill Campbell, God rest his soul, as their coach, they never would have created $1 trillion worth of value. That same coach worked with Google, worked with Steve Jobs. He also worked with Facebook, Zuckerberg. He worked with a lot of the people in Silicon Valley. That one coach contributed to creating trillions of dollars of value. And all of those people will come back and say, that person pushed them much more. So I want to challenge all of you, if you don't have a coach, get one.